of the Sustainable Foraging Task Force. We had an excellent day yesterday on our fun and adventurous field trip to the Snelling, what was it? Fort Snelling State Park. So to start off with our agenda today, why don't we go ahead and do the approval of our previous meeting minutes? I hope everyone's had a chance to review that. And if we can get a motion to approve the meetings minutes.
Chair, I move to approve the minutes.
Thank you. A second, please. All right, with the motion and a second, any discussion on the meeting minutes before we go and approve it? Seeing none, do we do the roll call? Okay, let's do roll call for the approval of the minutes.
Chair Pa,
Yes.
Vice Chair Scraba, Kelly Bruns,
Yes.
Representative Falconer, Dale Gentry, Senator Green,
Yes.
Angela Gupta, Bradley Harrington,
Yes.
Nibi Ogichi da Ikwe. Have I got that right? Oh, up to you. Greg Quale, Peter Martiniaco, Rebecca Montgomery, Kristen Poppleton, Ingrid Schneider, David sorry, David Schultz, Luke Skinner,
Yes.
Matt Wappler,
Yes.
Gary Wyatt.
All right. Looks like the meeting minutes are approved with how many yeses and one abstain? Nine yeses and one abstain. The meeting minutes are approved. Thank you, everyone. We'll go ahead and move on to the task force purpose, duties, and operating agreements. Just revisiting what the purpose of this task force is, as we've been doing in every meeting here. You'll see that we have been tasked with gathering and reviewing information on the impacts of foraging and the foraging on species, resilience, ecosystem health, and other aspects of Minnesota's biomes, solicitate public input when appropriate, and develop recommendations for the foraging guidelines, and also reviewing the reduced price foraging permits as a recommendation. Let's see. Our recommendations must be specific and actionable and consistent with Indigenous and other cultural practices with traditions. The task force must submit a written report to the Commissioner of the Natural Resource and the chairs and ranking members of the legislative committees in which they have primary jurisdiction over natural resource policy. And so our recommendations must be detailed proposals for the changes or additions to the statutes or rules. And we review this at every meeting just to kind of ground ourselves in the work that we have and the duties and tasks of our task force. Okay.
The duties are listed, but maybe just want to do it themselves.
Yeah. It's also in your slide deck.
And then we were going to just touch on the operating agreements as well.
Also reviewing our operating agreements. I'm one that's guilty of this, which is that please say your name before speaking, just so those online kind of knows who's speaking. And also those of us who are here knows who's speaking online as well. And if online, cameras on whenever possible. And then if we can come to our meetings prepared, that means reviewing the agenda and the materials ahead of time when possible. We always say take space, but also make space for others as well. Refrain from side conversations, show respect to members and presenters, be open-minded and curious about other people's opinions, viewpoints, and lived experiences. and recognize that time or research may be needed before questions are answered. And we're here to focus on the issue and not the people and assume good intentions. Those were some of the working operating agreements that we had established at the beginning of our task force. So we will try to adhere to those. Oh, let's see here. So today's agenda, we will be having a panel of traditional foraging. We'll have reactions to the field trip, and discussions about the scope of the task force will continue. But before we do that, why don't we go around and do quick introductions, as we always do, with your name and your role in the organizations that you represent. Why don't we go ahead and start on the right side, and then we'll go online.
Anine Bradley Harrington, I'm the Director of Tribal Relations for the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources.
Kelly Bruns, Minnesota DNR.
Matt Wappler, Assistant Region Manager for Central Region with the Division of Forestry.
Good morning, Nibi Ogechida Ikwe, representing Minnesota Indian Affairs Council.
State Senator Steve Green from District 2.
Stephanie Klein, Management Consultant with Management Analysis and Development, here to help facilitate.
Senator Susan Paugh, the legislative member to this task force.
Nick Nero, research analyst with the LCC.
I'm Greg Qualley with Backcountry Hunters and Anglers.
Rebecca Montgomery at the University of Minnesota Department of Forest Resources.
Peter Martiniaco with the Minnesota Mycological Society.
David Schultz, Professor of Political Science, Hamlin University, representing, the Minnesota Foraging Alliance. Good morning, all.
Good morning, Luke Skinner, Associate Superintendent, Three Rivers Park District.
And those online? Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure. Ingrid Schneider, University of Minnesota Department of Forest Resources. Apologies in advance. I have to leave early to teach.
And my name is Matt Williams with Management Analysis and Development. I'm along with Stephanie supporting this meeting, and I'm the one driving the slideshow this morning. And Ingrid, if you have things to say, I'll also be watching for the online space as well.
Is that it? Okay. So we're going to get started with our panel presenters today, the traditional foraging. I'd like to go ahead. Yeah. I'd like to go ahead and invite those who are here for the panel. I'm going to say your names wrong. So, or maybe I won't say them. I'll let you introduce yourself. So when you come back up, you'll do a much better job than me. But if I can invite the panelists to please come up and sit at the dais. There's microphones there and chairs. Thank you so much to our panelists for taking the time to come here today to our task force meeting. Your experiences, your input, and your perspective is very beneficial, very important to this work that we're doing. If I can have each one of you introduce yourself first and the organization that you represent, that would be great.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Tim Clemens from Ironwood Foraging.
And hello, everybody. My name is Samuel Thayer, and I don't represent an organization, but I've been teaching foraging for 30-some years.
Hello, everyone. My name is Luke Black Elk. I'm from the Makoche Kikchupi nonprofit and natives, and I've been a lifelong forager.
Hi, everyone. I'm Maria Westerly. I'm from Four Season Foraging, and I've been foraging for over 20 years now.
Thank you. And it looks like we've got another member who just joined us. Dale, can you introduce yourself really quick? online?
Sure. Sorry to be late. My name is Dale Gentry. I am with Audubon Upper Mississippi River.
Thank you, Dale. So how this panel is going to work is we're going to go ahead and have each of the panelists speak for 5 minutes. Take a little bit more time if you need. And then we'll go into some questions and then some discussion. So I'll go ahead and, do we have anyone specifically listed to go first? No? Oh, okay. Okay, great. How about we go ahead and go with Tim Clemens first, since you're already here on this side. And then
Okay,
we'll
great.
just go down the line.
Good morning again, Tim Clemens. Probably not gonna use my whole 5 minutes, more here for the questions. I'd just like to say that, so at Ironwood Foraging, I created that business, really just a vehicle to teach, it's just me, to create profound connections between people, plants, and mushrooms. Really with the main goal, the immediate goal to build knowledge and more importantly, experience in Minnesotans about plants and mushrooms, ecology, our place and our connection with those. The second and third order effects are more volunteerism, increased budgets, increased seeing of land and understanding, that water health and land health and air health are like literally connected to us. When I see, so I've taught over 15,000 people now directly, many hundreds of thousands more on the internet. And I see universally from our youngest Minnesotans to our elders that this is a positive experience for them. It adds richness and texture to every day of their life. The amount of people that I've seen, 5 years after I saw them at one class and they come up to me excitedly and say, I harvest wild rice now, and I just harvested this first mushroom species, and it's new to me. And I took my grandchildren or I took my partner, and we're doing it now. That's reigniting this tradition. Coincidentally, I'd also like to point out that, in Minneapolis, the park board has all these friends groups, which are volunteer created and staffed groups that support a specific lake or park with a specific scope of work. The amount of those groups that have been started by somebody that got into nature because of foraging is immense. And it's very typical to see that a group that maybe had 4 people on it for years and years now has 35, 50 people on it. And almost all of those new people are on it because they got into foraging first and started seeing the plants and seeing the land. And now we're planting native species all over the place. So I just want to say that this is a very positive, there's very positive effects spiderwebbing out from someone being a forager. That's just all I want to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Clemens. And then next up,
Is this on? I guess I probably don't need it. My name is Samuel Thayer, and I want to thank you all for inviting me here. And thank you for taking on this really important task. You're asking me to speak while sitting down, which is really unusual for me. I'm usually laying down or in the water or standing or running around. But I want to start at a place that maybe is a little bit unexpected. And this is if we go back to 1860, I think we can agree that the United States is a fairly racist society. But if you wanted to talk about that, there's not any words to talk about it. The word racism didn't exist. The word racist didn't exist. It was so ingrained in the people's way of thinking that no one had even identified that as a problem. So I would like to venture something a little controversial here, that we live in a profoundly anti-foraging society today. And that's infused in the way we think about foraging in a lot of ways. Just to open your eyes to that a little bit, we can go back to 1870 with Ralph Waldo Emerson, and his poem and essay titled Farming contains the line, "The first farmer was the first man." And this is just Emerson's interpretation of Genesis in the Bible, right? We become human through becoming farmers. This is how powerful the prejudice against gathering and hunting food is, particularly gathering. So in 1860, we had a word for people that hunted and gathered all their food. That word was savage. Now, that word through connotation, all the negative things that European settlers thought about people that hunted and gathered their food have now become the definition associated with that word savage, criminal, violent, unruly, all these negative things. But if we go back in time far enough, that word simply meant wild. That's why there's thousands of people in England that claim it as a last name, because it didn't have that negative connotation to start with. So we're sort of forced with this today, dealing with this deeply negative feelings about gathering wild food that are somewhat uniquely American. Having spent a fair amount of time in France, for example, the attitude in Europe is this knowledge is our history. And our history is important. And even if we don't do this a lot, it's important to keep the stuff alive. The unique history of the United States is totally different than that. And there's this us and them between the European people that colonized this continent and the them that were being pushed out. And those traditions were seen in a very negative light. And those of us who are foragers have had to deal with this for as long as we've been foraging. So one thing I would like the panel to think about is that what we are asking, what we would like to see is foraging treated like hunting and fishing. I'm a lifelong avid hunter and fisherman, but also a gatherer of wild food. And in the state of Minnesota, the vast majority of mammals in the state of Minnesota can be killed in unlimited numbers without a license, with any type of equipment or weapon, and year round, right? So they're totally unregulated. Now, the state of Minnesota in the DNR pamphlet specifically lists, I think, 6 species like pocket gopher, striped skunk, coyote, woodchuck. I'm not sure what else is in there. I've eaten all those animals except for pocket gopher. We have these regulations very loose, and we have this despite the fact that objectively, ecologically, we recognize that animals are much more easy to overharvest than plants are. So the conversion rate with mammals is about, roughly a 10-to-1 ratio of biomass. But only about 2% of the biomass of plants actually gets eaten by animals. So plants are about 450 times as abundant on the landscape by biomass than animals. In our state parks, we almost invariably allow fishing. If there is water to be fished, fishing is allowed. And yet we all recognize that overfishing is part of fishing. Fishermen will say, oh, this is a better place to fish because it's not as heavily fished. The bass are bigger and there's more in here, right? So we recognize that we're having an impact on the population. With foraging, it's much harder to have those impacts. And there's a very small number of, I would say, highly publicized cases where there's 1 or 2 foraged plants that are marketable and that has people fearful that foraging in general is destroying the landscape. When in fact we see the opposite effect. I think the biggest threat facing the ecological health of Minnesota's natural landscapes is invasive species. And there is no group of people that I am aware of that's more active in terms of in general in their personal life in trying to control invasive species. I don't think I know a single forager who doesn't go out of their way to be involved in free, unpaid invasive species control. That just becomes a natural part of foraging. Because when you gather things, you experience, when this thing literally becomes your body, you experience gratitude in a way that you can't really experience without that. It is profound. And that gratitude creates action. And it also creates a whole set of secondary emotions that result from that gratitude. And so I just want to give one example of that gratitude at play. In the state of Minnesota, lotus is a protected species. Lotus is one of our, I would say, iconic wild foods in Minnesota, an incredible native staple food. In the state of New Jersey, it's an endangered species. It's much more common in Minnesota than it is in New Jersey. Its protection in Minnesota is not related to the Endangered Species Act. Despite being an endangered species in New Jersey, a group of wealthy homeowners on a lake that had the largest population of lotus in the state petitioned the state DNR to allow them to eliminate 50% of the population of lotus. They got that permission, even though it was a state endangered species. I don't know how that works. I've never had enough money to have that kind of influence. But interestingly, the only people that were speaking up on behalf of the lotus, preserving it, was a group of people who had been illegally collecting lotus nuts on that lake for years. They were at great risk if they were caught collecting those nuts. That's an endangered species. They have no business collecting those nuts. They were the only people who cared. You know what happened after they removed the 50% of the lotus nuts, or the lotus population on that lake? Is the entire area was overtaken by the invasive water chestnut, which has not made its way to Minnesota yet. It'll probably be here eventually, right? So there's just a little microcosm of what happens when we exclude foragers from decision-making about natural resources. I'm a duck hunter. Duck hunters are included. Duck hunters are involved. The DNR listens to duck hunters. Foragers don't have that seat at the table. And I'm asking, and I think we all would support reasonable regulations and not unreasonably prohibitive regulations. And as far as being on board with plant conservation, I started as a Nature Conservancy volunteer when I was 14 years old. When I was 17, I went through the training to become a certified Nature Conservancy spokesperson so I could speak publicly on behalf of the Nature Conservancy. I was involved in prairie conservation, habitat restoration, oak savanna restoration, and I had a particular interest in reptiles and amphibians. I started working for the Wisconsin DNR doing frog surveys, frog population surveys when I was 21. I have been involved in conservation deeply through my entire life, plant conservation and animal conservation. And if you want allies in conservation, foragers are the people. And if you want to build allies, give people that relationship to the plants and the landscape. There is nothing that will more strongly build those relationships and the understanding. Every forager is a repository of knowledge. And sometimes that's knowledge that's institutionally hard to find. I could go on with examples, but I won't. So thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Mr. Thayer.
Hello again. So my name is, again, Luke Black Elk. I'm an enrolled member of the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe from South Dakota, but I represent the Oceti Sakowin, which is the 7 council fires, of which the Dakota are a major part of. And the Dakota are very underrepresented here. In fact, as far as I know, it's still under law that we are exiled from this state. So we are the original inhabitants of this area. And we have been utilizing the gifts of our Mother Earth. And when I say that, I don't say that in some sort of new agey kind of way where we're all related kind of thing. I really mean that. I grew up believing that this is my mother and that she will provide for me if I treat her right. And I don't think I've been foraging illegally most of my life. It's been illegal as an Indigenous person for me to get my food and my medicine from the place where it has always been, on my mother. I've had to break laws until things have finally gotten changed within the system, and there's more ease of access now, but there's still not enough access, especially for Indigenous people. I care deeply for a lot of my non-Indigenous relatives, but for Indigenous people, there isn't a lot of access to these spaces. There's a lot of people who want their traditional foods, who want their traditional medicines, who want access to land, and are so afraid that they might get thrown in jail or have some sort of lifelong criminal record attached to them, that they don't go out, they don't seek this food, and they're stuck in a system that's not working for them. And so I'm very glad that my brother Sam went before me, because he spoke very eloquently, I think, for the plants, and I really appreciate what he said. But I really encourage you all to, yes, we can have regulations, we can have permitting for these things, but we don't need to ban people from foraging. I've already lived under that, and it's not a good place to be. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Black Elk. Next.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm honored to be here among such esteemed guests and sharing some of my knowledge and experience. So I have a prepared statement here, and I'd like to start by zooming out a bit and taking a look at foraging from the broad context of human history. So currently, foraging is often described as harvesting food from the wild or from nature. Implicit in this language is the assumption that humans are separate from the non-human world. However, archaeological and anthropological evidence paints a much different picture. Foraging and farming are not as distinct as they seem to modern-day perspectives. Traditionally, foraging involves careful management of desirable foods. In Minnesota, this includes the use of selective burning among Indigenous people to diversify and improve the health of the forest. And to quote David Graeber and David Wengrow from their book, The Dawn of Everything, quote, "There are many ways other than European-style farming in which to care for and improve the productivity of the land. What to a settler's eye seemed savage, untouched wilderness usually turns out to be a landscape actively managed by Indigenous populations for thousands of years through controlled burning, weeding, coppicing, fertilizing, and pruning, and so on. Such procedures were often labor-intensive and regulated by Indigenous laws. In parts of Australia, these Indigenous techniques of land management were such that, according to one recent study, we should stop speaking of foraging altogether and refer instead to a different kind of farming." End quote. Evidence shows that many plants benefit from responsible human harvesting. An example of a local plant that benefits from disturbance is common milkweed. Monarch caterpillars feed on several species of milkweed. This study from the Michigan State University focuses on common milkweed, Asclepias syriaca, which is a popular wild edible. Quote, "Female monarchs greatly prefer to lay eggs on young milkweed shoots, which are typically only present in May and June. These stems are more tender and may be more suitable as food for early stage caterpillars, but they get harder for butterflies to find as the summer progresses. The potential solution we discovered is based on common milkweed's remarkable ability to regrow after being cut back. Under most conditions, when a common milkweed stem is cut off near ground level, in about 2 weeks, a new shoot will appear from the roots. These new shoots are highly attractive to female monarchs, receiving 2 to 10 times more eggs than older stems. In addition, regrowing stems harbor fewer predators, giving young monarchs a chance to grow. In our studies, survival of eggs and young larvae was 2 to 2.5 times higher on regrowing stems." End quote. There are also many native or naturalized species that grow and reproduce prolifically and are therefore at low risk for endangerment from overharvesting. Abundant fruit and mass crops grow in Minnesota. Blueberries, acorns, black walnuts, chokecherries, Juneberries, hazelnuts are just a few examples. As for mushrooms, single specimens of certain species like chicken of the woods, hen of the woods, and giant puffballs can often feed an entire family, while smaller species like morels, oysters, and chanterelles can be locally abundant when conditions align. Hardly mentioned in discussions about the sustainability of foraging are the prolific amounts of invasive plants that are edible and delicious. A few such species include garlic, mustard, autumn olive, wild parsnip, and creeping bellflower. Additionally, there exist many weedy plants that are sometimes considered invasive, such as dandelion, burdock, wild carrot, and lamb's quarters. Rather than spraying dangerous pesticides or herbicides, why not just eat them? Imagine a food system that's the opposite of our current one, with its reliance on monocultures, heavy use of toxic chemicals, dependence on fossil fuels, and suppression of small and medium-scale operations. Foraging is exactly such a system. Getting food from native ecosystems means that biodiverse entities, such as forests and prairies, are supported over toxic, large-scale, and out-of-balance entities like cornfields. To me, this is the true meaning of sustainability, not its current use as a buzzword that greenwashes extravagant products and encourages excessive commercial consumption, but an active restructuring that shifts our current systems away from environmentally degrading processes toward restorative practices. Instead of banning or severely limiting foraging in an effort to reduce humans' effect on our surrounding landscape, we should acknowledge the positive contributions that humans can make. Foragers build a deep connection with the land they forage from and act to steward that land. The study Urban Non-Timber Forest Products Stewardship Practices Among Foragers in Seattle, Washington, indicates that, quote, foragers engage in practices aimed at reducing harm and increasing plant populations. The study results suggest that an opportunity exists for park managers to develop alliance with foragers so as to leverage foragers' everyday stewardship practices and accomplish some of their park restoration objectives. Foraging represents an underutilized method of gathering food that, when done correctly, actually increases biodiversity and creates habitat for myriad species. We all want to protect Minnesota's public lands for people and wildlife. Foragers and governments can support each other in conducting studies, restoring ecosystems, and developing regulations that are truly equitable and sustainable. Coming together, we can preserve the beauty of Minnesota's green spaces while instituting a more relational method of stewarding the land we love. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to give a few minutes for any one of you to share just a few thoughts or reactions from maybe your fellow panelists that have spoken before we go into questions.
One thing I wanted to say is, as a former Wisconsin DNR employee, I'm aware that the DNR cannot have an expert for every plant that's out there, every salamander that's out there. But when you have foragers out there, you have, I'll just take Lotus, my example. I know there's maybe 150 to 300 Lotus harvesters in Minnesota. They mostly come to Wisconsin to harvest because it's legal to harvest there. But that's a few hundred people that are like non-paid experts on a particular plant. And of course, people's knowledge level varies. But that's absolutely invaluable to have an interface between the natural resource managers and people that are using that resource. And that goes for, of course, not every plant is of interest to foragers, not every mushroom, but a large enough portion are that there is something to represent every single native plant community in this state has, usually more than one plant that's attractive to foragers. And allowing that to happen creates a cycle of feedback between the government and the people that are using those resources. So I think it's a great way to have that feedback, just as there is with hunting and fishing.
Yeah.
My sister here reminded me that, I think that also the land needs us as much as we need the land. A part of that burning and a part of that caretaking, that comes with foraging. When you're out there and you're experiencing these things, you want these things to grow, and you're going to find out how to help them to have the best life that they can, because your life is dependent on their life. So we as human beings are an intrinsic part of the environment, and I think we've really lost that in the fact that we have gone into these urban landscapes and really stepped away from nature in a lot of ways. And I think if we get our people back into thinking about foraging and thinking about the plants around them in a better light, rather than seeing dandelions as just a weed, realizing that it's also a medicine, it's also a food, and there's so much more to it than just something that's on the herbicide spray bottle, and that you got to get it out of your lawn to keep that perfect, right? So I think we really need to step back into this area where all of us are thinking about Mother Earth as our mother rather than just the ground.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Yeah, I would just like to thank Sam and Luke here for bringing in the racist and colonialist aspect of the current modern cultures, especially in the US, of its opinion on foraging, and the fact that we're even here discussing the merits of foraging, I think goes to show just how underutilized and underappreciated and undervalued it is. And as Sam mentioned, a lot of that does go back to the colonialist history of the US, and as Luke mentioned as well. So thank you for highlighting that.
I just want to say something real quick because I know government, we're concerned about budgets and everything. There is no more cost-effective way to increase the public's awareness, participation, and concern about the outdoors than to facilitate outdoor activities. And, you know, and I'm not even asking for facilitation, just allow it. You know, and I don't mean allow it everywhere all the time in anything, anywhere, you know, that's not what I mean at all. But it shouldn't be like a blanket, nothing can be gathered unless, except for this and this. It should be the opposite. Anything can reasonably be gathered unless, except for this, and this, and we have reasons that you shouldn't gather those things or in these places.
I just want to piggyback off of that. So that exact point, I grew up in the city. So in South Minneapolis, raised in a townhome, no yard to speak of. My first time going to any sort of state park was when I was a forager in my early 20s. Bought a state park license plate as soon as I could get a license plate. I started believing in state parks and defending state land and realizing that, you know, I could have a positive effect on it. You know, less than 10% of my classes, my plant identification and mushroom identification classes are on state land. Most of it is on county and city land. But there's no reason that the model that I've helped create on city and county land can't be expanded. You know, I didn't know what, you know, before I started foraging, I knew trees were a thing, and I knew of the trees, there was Christmas trees, and there was trees with leaves, okay? There were flowers and fruits, and I did have a sneaking suspicion that some things were delicious and some things would kill me, but I wasn't gonna try because I was scared, you know? And now, you know, on my own time, you know, footing the whole bill, you know, I raised myself up to the knowledge level of a subject matter expert on plants. You know, nobody did that for me. Nobody subsidized that. It was on my free time. So if I'm doing that, and I've personally seen thousands of people doing that, then Sam, your point is proved that this is the most value-added way to create stakeholders in our public lands.
Yeah. Thank you.
So if you don't mind, one little thing I wanted to mention also, this, the literature that I read when I came into the building here mentioned on Minnesota state parks that you were allowed to collect, I think it said mushrooms and fruits. And so as foragers, one thing that would really help people would be clarity in the rules. Because I haven't been there in a few years, but the last time I was at the Mississippi River Bluff State Park, wonderful state park in southeastern Minnesota, there's a billboard as you enter the park about shagbark hickory nuts. And it seems to be encouraging people to gather shagbark hickory nuts. I camped there with my children. We gathered shagbark hickory nuts. We cracked them and ate them at the picnic table. And I think that was okay. You know, the billboard seemed to be inviting me to do that. And as I understood the state regulations, that's allowed. But this little handout said mushrooms and fruits. And so there's a little bit of ambiguity there that could be misinterpreted. And these are all over the place in the use of public lands, what is and isn't allowed in foraging. And it would be really nice for that kind of stuff to be clarified for the users. Because as a hunter and a fisherman and a forager, I feel like the gatherers are the most likely people to follow the rules. They're and the least likely to leave trash. And so, but we have to know what the rules are first.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all for the great thoughts and experience that you've contributed to this. I just want to say that I relate to a lot of what you guys have said. I've been one, to Mr. Black Elk's comment, I've been one who's been foraging illegally for a very long time as well. And I know this task force has heard me say that many times. It's tough when you know the land has so much to offer, and also your ancestors or your parents and grandparents have taught you that there are certain things that you can forage in the state parks or forests on public lands that are good for medicinal purposes. And you can't find them anywhere else. And it's hard to say, I'm not going to do that when there's so much abundance out there. And it is something to your culture and your tradition. So I'm one that does that as well. And it's it's kind of like this battle within you when you're foraging. You can't totally enjoy it, even though it's something that's a part of you. And you know that you're taking what you need from the earth, and you're enjoying that, but at the same time, you feel like you're doing something wrong. Like this is, like you're doing something wrong. That's a terrible feeling because you can't make that true connection to the land and the earth and to what it provides for you. You can't make that true connection of enjoying, appreciation, being grateful for it. But one thing I've done is I've tried to teach my children in all of our trips to appreciate the land and also appreciate what it can give us. And when we forage it, fish, hunt, and what it does is it gives my children the opportunity to be curious about the land, to appreciate the land and to take care of it even better. I don't have to remind them, pick up your trash, after you bring your trash with you. Don't just leave it there when we're in the parks and on state lands. Don't do that because they know to do that. Because they know that when I come back and visit, I want it to be still available to me. When they pick up a Solomon seal or a fiddlehead and we forage for that and they eat it, they appreciate that they picked it and that it came from the land. And they don't have to be forced to be told to eat like they do with their broccolis, because they appreciate that. They know. They also appreciate that when they take care of the land also provides for them. And these are children. But when they're out in our lands and experiencing it, they have a love for the earth and the land in a way that we can't teach them any other way than for them to experience it themselves and have an ownership in it. And so I just want to say thank you to all of you because everything you've said just reminds me that this is how we take care of our earth. This is how we take care of our land. When we teach our children to be in the land, to take from the land what they need, but also to take care of it. So thank you. And then I'm going to open it up to questions, thoughts from our members. David.
David Schultz, Madam Chair, if I could ask a question of all the panelists? Okay, good. An observation and the question. One of the things that I found interesting is listening to all of your comments here is you identifying what I'm going to call goals, or not going to call it values, associated with foraging. I'm hearing a variety of things in terms of how it contributes to what? Maybe self-expression, cultural understanding, scientific knowledge, a variety of things. But I'm just curious, because I think at some point this committee has to be thinking about what are the goals, the values we're trying to promote. Can all of you sort of just briefly sort of comment? Again, I list a couple of them here, but what goals or values do you think the foraging and foragers really help promote and allowing foraging to promote? Thank you.
I think it comes down to really a connection to the world around us. Like the senator was saying, when you're teaching your children this, you're giving them this values that they want this thing to be there when they come in, and that if they treat it right, it will, and if they make sure that the landscape around it is treated well, there'll be more. It'll grow, right? And so I think that's a big part of it, is that learning that respect for the world around you, because you know that it's providing for you. Just like you have respect for your parents because they're providing for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're instinctively attracted to things that we need. We're attracted to foods that taste good. We experience this. People are attracted to finding something valuable outside. It's exciting. You find the thing and it's so exciting. It's addictive. And then when you eat the thing, it's like you've consummated your addiction in a wholesome way. And now this super nutritious, healthy thing becomes part of your body, and you cannot escape the gratitude that comes from that. And I don't want to get too emotional, but I feel like as a child, foraging saved my life. And if I can share that with people, I will. And nobody can escape the miracle of that experience. Nobody can escape it. Even people that think it's stupid and ridiculous and it's what poor people do or whatever, they do that, they experience that, and it's all that falls away. It's now cool. It's cool. I got detained and harassed once for almost an hour for collecting something that was legal to harvest. And the warden said to me, "You need to prove to me that you're not going to sell this when you leave." And I said, "You would never say that to a walleye fisherman. It's illegal to sell a walleye, but you never tell a guy at the boat landing he's got to prove he's not going to sell the walleye later before you let him leave. That doesn't make any sense." I mean, that's what we face as foragers, that kind of anti-foraging stuff. And I whispered to my wife who was there, I said, go roast some of these so we can feed him some and he will leave us alone. And when she brought them back and we fed him some, and it took him like 10 minutes. We just kept eating in front of him. And my kids, they were toddlers. They were eating these nuts in front of us. And finally he tried one and his eyes just lit up. And he was like, "Wow, that's so much better than I thought." And he just left me alone and let me go. And, so there's no, like that experience of taking care of the land. I mean, that's what foragers are all about. I mean, there's also healthy food. I mean, wow, you can get the best food in the world, flavor-wise and nutrition-wise, for free. I mean, our entire society is slightly chronically undernourished. We have enough calories, but we are undernourished in our micronutrients. And when you analyze wild foods and compare them to domestic foods, we find that they are, wild foods have 2 to 2.5 times the nutrient density. That's what we're adapted to. That's what our ancestors ate for ages and ages, and we need more of that. So, I mean, 2 of the most wholesome things in the world: taking care of your land and taking care of your body. That's kind of the foundation of what I see in the interest in foraging, is based on those 2 things, and that's what I think I can say we're all about.
Yeah.
I'll just say I think there's a lot of values that are associated with foraging that I hold, and I think all, if not, most or all foragers hold. And some of them have been mentioned by y'all, like the values of the fresh, free food, healthy food, the connection with cultural significance, with like your history and your people. Also the connection to the non-human world, connecting to nature, having that direct relationship, something that's not mediated by, buying things from the grocery store, for example. Also, I'll say, like, in my experience personally and in teaching classes, I've just watched how amazing the act of foraging is for building community and bringing together people who often are from really different political backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds, but they all just love being outside and they're all interested in, taking care of the outdoors and eating things from their neighborhoods and from their land and from our public lands, and just seeing the way that people can connect over that, and the way that food and specifically the act of gathering things together as a group builds community, and eating that together and sharing the joy in that. And I think that's a really beautiful thing that you don't see as strongly in a lot of other places.
Yeah. Do we value friendship? Do we value love? Trying to explain that to somebody why that's good feels weird. It's almost like explain the color of the sky on a sunny day without using the color blue. You'd be like, okay, describe blue without saying blue. I only vaguely remember what it was like not to be a forager. And so, but I can still remember clearly like what it's brought into my life. Something I discovered that I wasn't prepared for was that nurturing something is its own harvest. We talk a lot about what we're physically gathering from the landscape, but I've found that the act of, removing invasive species, planting seeds of native species, that has been a harvest all on its own. It's made me a better person. And I've seen that happen in many, many others as well. More concrete reductionist things like building self-efficacy, the power to believe that you can overcome the challenges that life presents to you, that we all face. And just like Maria said, in my classes, oftentimes there is no single uniting feature among any of they say the 20 people there. Nobody has anything in common. By the end, we do. So I think that's valuable for all Minnesotans.
Yeah. Other questions or comments from Gary?
Madam Chair, Gary Wyatt, University of Minnesota of our forestry team. Apologize for being late, first of all, and not hearing all of the panelists, the members. So this committee is called Sustainable Foraging Task Force, okay? I have two questions for you. A lot of the information that's given in the Department of Natural Resources in foraging says personal use, okay? So I have two questions for you, the panelists. Number one, could you define sustainable foraging? And then number two, can you define personal use? Thank you.
Or maybe give us your thoughts on what that
Your
is, what
thoughts.
that definition is to you.
Your thoughts.
Personally.
Thank you.
Well, I would say the sustainable use would be the use of a resource that doesn't have a notable negative impact on that resource. But it has to be, I guess, within reasonable bounds, right? Because when I shoot a deer, I know that that deer is dead and there's one less deer in the landscape. And as hunters, we all understand that, and fishermen, we understand that. But we also understand what ecologists call density-dependent effects, right? So as soon as, if you have the appropriate habitat, you remove an organism, you've reduced the competition for the other organisms, and they respond by having commensurately increased reproductive capacity or reproductive success. This is really well understood in fisheries, but for some reason in the discussion of foraging, we act like this could not be possible. It also applies equally to plants. Sustainable foraging is facilitated largely through that attitude that you care. And as far as personal use, I think in a more simple sense, that means you're not selling what you're harvesting, for profit. And that's a very small part of the foraging community. And I'm fully in support of there being additional or different regulations for that. And we have that with wild rice and ginseng, the two things that you need a license to harvest in the wild in Minnesota, is largely because they are commercialized, and the license is needed for that purpose. But not many people are foraging many other things for sale, except some fruits and mushrooms, which are quite resilient because you're not really harming the plant population by harvesting them.
I think that what Sam said is very true in the white world, but in the indigenous world, there are a much broader, there's a much broader explanation for personal use. We sell and trade a lot of what we gather. Back home, so I'm from South Dakota originally, and in South Dakota, there's a plant called Pediomelium esculentum, prairie turnip. We call it Teamsula. And it's a threatened plant. It's not threatened by foragers. It's not threatened by indigenous people. It's threatened by industrial ag and urbanization. I've gathered this plant my whole entire life since I was a child. I'm 40 years old now. My people have foraged this for thousands and thousands of years. It's not threatened by gatherers. It's not threatened by indigenous people. It's threatened by outside forces, like I said, like urbanization, industrial ag. And if you you talk to people, scientists and things like that in South Dakota, they'll say that this plant is a threatened plant and that we shouldn't be gathering and we should be very careful. But if you look at indigenous ways of gathering this plant, it is very sustainably gathered. We only gather it after it's seeded. We ensure that its seeds spread after we pick it. We don't over harvest in the area that we're at. And we don't spend more than 4 years in one area gathering. And this is just traditional ecological knowledge that has been with our people for millennia. And so I don't think that personal use, and people sell this. People will go out and gather this and sell it. There are a lot of young individuals who go out and gather this, and then because it's work, they will sell it to older individuals who can't go out anymore and do this. I see that with choke cherries. I see that with a lot of things. I've never bought or sold ginseng. I bought a lot of wild rice. So I think that personal use is very different depending on who you're asking.
Mhm.
But I think it's all very sustainable.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for the question about sustainable foraging, I don't know if you're able to hear my statement, but in summary, basically, I think that the question itself is a bit of a red herring because sustainability is such a buzzword these days and something that's applied to a lot of things that are most certainly not sustainable. And moreover, I think that when we consider the sustainability of foraging, we have to consider it alongside the sustainability of other food production methods. So something that riles me up a lot is, when people get angry or defensive about foragers harvesting food from natural lands, but then those people not examining the role that they're playing by supporting industrial agriculture that we know is unsustainable, that pollutes our land, that depletes our topsoil, that gets nitrates in the water. So, like, for me, the question about sustainable foraging is more so a question of like, how do we shift systems to include things like foraging that are locally based, that don't use fossil fuels or toxic chemicals, things that support a direct relationship with our surrounding landscape and that help grow people into responsible stewards of the land. I think all of that is encompassed in sustainable foraging. And as far as the question for personal amounts, I know that I know some of the background of why we're here today, and that among the DNR, that's something that's been debated, is that the current law or the current rule as it states for, that foraging is for personal consumption is too vague, and that we need a defined amount. Like, is that a gallon per person per day? Is that 2 gallons? Is it a different amount for different things? And yeah, like Luke said, I mean, I think that really varies depending on who you're talking to. Like, some people have a diet that's really heavy on foraged foods, the people on this panel here, and some people might be doing it more for a hobby or for the curiosity of it, or the land connection or spiritual reasons, and those people might be just harvesting like a few mushrooms at a time kind of thing. Whereas when we get people out there who are more interested in having it like supplement their daily food intake, then you are getting people picking more things. But as other folks have said, I do think that it's all sustainable, especially when it comes to, fruits and nuts and mushrooms, which is not harvesting. It's not at all hurting the greater organism. It's just picking the fruiting body. But yeah, also, things like digging roots and picking greens and flowers can be done in a sustainable and reciprocal way.
Thank you. Any other questions? David?
Yeah, David Schultz, Madam Chair, question, maybe to Marie, maybe to all of them here. I want to sketch out a scenario. Let us say we were to impose quantity restrictions on how much you could forage per day. What are the consequences of imposing the restrictions? And then flip side, what do you anticipate are the consequences if we didn't impose quantity restrictions? You see the two different scenarios I'm sketching out here? Tell me what sort of your thoughts are on it. Thank you.
It's a good question. I think it ties into the previous question as well. Real quick, foraging is inherently sustainable. Think about it this way. Say you're an apprentice electrician. You're regarded as not an electrician yet for 5 years, and you're paid accordingly and you're treated accordingly. So there's like a leeway that you get. Look at our society, as the mainstream society at least, as one that has never had less plant knowledge. They've never been more plant blind. They're undernourished with especially, trace minerals and whatnot. We need to regard ourselves as, in an apprenticeship. And when one takes on the foraging lifestyle, you undergo an apprenticeship. It's not defined. It's not 5 years or whatever, but you're going to make mistakes. You know, the first time as children, we were all given Legos or building blocks or something like that. You tried to eat them first. That's the first thing you did, probably like the first 100 times. You just tried to eat them.
I still do.
Exactly. So we make mistakes, right? Learning is an iterative process. It necessitates these little tiny interactions that we've all but forgotten in our life. These millions of interactions. That's every single person's journey into foraging. Once you are a forager, though, what you're doing and what we've talked about today is inherently sustainable. It is a reciprocal relationship because we think of these plants as friends, as non-human relatives, whether incentivized or not. I mean, there's a very real incentive to keep these things healthy, keep them going. If you want to reduce it to just that, the most pragmatic person that has no sort of nature sense or ecology, they're not a hippie at all, they are going to be the biggest defender of that plant. Okay, inherently sustainable. Then personal use, this ties in too, because like, what is an amount that's personal use? Hard to define, but I think one thing, and I have no recommendations for that, but I think one thing we need to talk about too is there are parallel economies that aren't just the United States dollar and the monetary value and held where therein. Gift economies, economies of good feels, like if you give a gift to somebody, you're not just giving them money. You're like, hey, that was worth $12. You're now in debt to me $12. I expect it back. It could be much sweeter than the money you paid for it. It could touch their heart and it could be so meaningful. That's a parallel economy that we're all engaging in. So if we harvest food and you gift it to somebody, which is oftentimes very important, especially for people who can't get out themselves to forage, like our elders or our young ones, that's an economy. I don't know what to say about that, but it's not as important in our culture, but there are many cultures on the planet where it's foundational. It's actually more important than any sort of fiat currency economy. So I just wanted to say that and kind of open up that perspective.
Well, and I also want to be clear that I don't think commercial foraging is inherently unsustainable. I mean, for 18 years, I harvested wild rice full time. I learned through the Anishinaabe tradition at Bad River Reservation in Wisconsin, and that was an incredibly important part of my life. And I feel like we did it in an exemplary and sustainable fashion. And I want to almost take back everything I said, because what you said about the question about sustainable foraging being a red herring, I feel that. I mean, the question almost is inherent in it is the idea that there's like a problem with unsustainable foraging, and I haven't encountered that problem yet. I heard about it a little bit, but I haven't really encountered it. And so, I would say according to my definition of sustainable foraging, I don't think we have any such thing as sustainable forestry. And I don't have a problem with forestry, but when you log an area, it affects the vegetation, right? And that effect is long term. I think it's perfectly fine that we do that. But as humans, we affect the landscape, and that's okay. So we apply two different standards here, one to foragers and one to land managers making money by selling trees. And they're totally different standards. So I would maybe challenge you to even think about why it's called the Sustainable Foraging Panel. Maybe it's what are reasonable foraging regulations. I know I can't upend everything. But your question about what would be the different effects of different types of regulations. When we harvest wild rice, whether in Wisconsin or Minnesota, there's not an amount you're allowed to harvest. There's a time you're allowed to harvest, and there's methods you can use, and there's equipment you can use. And if you get 425 pounds, you had a darn good day. No one's telling you got to stop at some certain point. And a lot of stuff that people harvest is available for a very short time. If I have a weekend and I'm going to go pick hickory nuts at this one farm where I have permission to pick hickory nuts, and I go with my wife and my kids, we're going to collect a whole bunch because we're going to eat a whole bunch of hickory nuts. Now, that doesn't mean like in a state park or something, I don't know how that would play out, but maybe somebody else won't find as many hickory nuts as they wanted, and so you're regulating interactions between people there. But I also, if I'm going to a state park, I'm probably not harvesting this huge load of hickory nuts. I'm probably going to get a little bit, right? So, but I don't know, really overall, it doesn't seem like there's a big imposition either way. It's not often, I think, that those things are going to come into play, but occasionally they will. A few times a year, somebody's going to go out and they want to pick a bushel of apples and they can only get a peck. You know, if it's 2 gallons limits, you can get just a peck of apples. That's one little bag, you know, from the orchard. Whereas most people, if they're going to go out and pick apples, they don't want one little bag. They would like a couple baskets full. That's the way foraging is normally practiced. What people don't think of, they should limit themselves. That's a very weird way to regulate foraging. It does sort of mimic how we do with fish and with other animals that are hunted and fished. But that's because the biomass of those animals is so much lower. The harvest pressure is so much higher. When we have an animal that the harvest pressure is close to zero, the bag limits are unlimited. We see that in virtually every jurisdiction that regulates animal harvest. If the pressure is low, there's not a limit.
Any other thoughts or questions from the panel? Bradley?
Bradley Harrington, Minnesota DNR. So what I'm hearing from the panel is, you know, that what we gather from our relatives in the wild greatly benefits us physically. But then we've been hearing hints of it with the mental and emotional impacts that being out there in the wild, being with our relatives does. But then also it touches us spiritually. Those plants and relatives in the wild have impacts to who we are as a human being if we account for the mental, emotional, physical, and the spiritual part. So I got a question for my COLA, Mr. Black Elk. Who would the people of the Oceti-Sakowin be without access to the relatives of the wild? And the others can answer as well.
So we wouldn't be the same people if we didn't have access to our wild relatives. You see that in a lot of, so, you know, I was talking to some of my Dakota relatives from here, and there's some estimated somewhere about 5,000 to 7,000 unincorporated Dakota people who exist unenrolled here in Minnesota. And I think a part of it is that loss, that disconnection of spiritual relationship here. We were exiled and we've had to go underground and we've had to stay hidden. And so we've lost that a lot. And so without that connection to these plants, we're not the same people. You know, I think Anishinaabe feel the same way. Connection with wild rice, that's your whole reason for coming west, was because someone had a dream about a food that grew on water. And you came this way because you followed that dream, and Mother Earth provided for you because she knew that you needed it, right? The Dakota people, we have the Corn Silk Treaty with you all, and you know, we go back to that and talk about the impact that has. That's why we don't make war with each other. And so I think that we really, as Indigenous people, and just all people, I mean, we're all Indigenous to somewhere. We all need to have that connection to the plant relatives because, like you said, it really does impact your life in that whole holistic aspect of spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical. It gives you everything you need. And it goes back to what I've been saying throughout, is that when I say Mother Earth, it's not just lip service. I really feel like the earth is my mother. Like, I came from this place and I need to protect it and I need to care for it. I need to be a warrior for the water. I need to be a warrior for the earth and for the plants. And that's a part of what we're trying to do here is give voice to the voiceless. a lot of it seems like we're trying to just, oh, we want to make a profit. We want to get food. No, these plants have a connection to us. When Tim says that these are our non-human relatives, he really means that. It's not just him saying that. He really feels a connection to these. When I talk about Fichincha, Wapato, when I talk about wild rice, when I talk about these things, I think of them as relatives. And as an Ocheti Shakoni person, I need these plants as much as and they need me. We need to be a part of the landscape. We can't remove ourselves from the landscape and think of ourselves as separate individuals. We're all connected, and as human beings, we really need to realize that we're animals, and we need to be on the earth too. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? Peter and then Luke.
This is Peter Martiniaco from the Mycological Society. I want to thank the panel. You've spoken most eloquently. I want to thank Bradley for clarifying the importance of things other than the food. Sometimes people who are not foragers don't realize how much work goes into free food. It's a lot of work. It's not free from a dollars and cents standpoint, except for the gas, and the way to get there and stuff like that. But it's because we care about it, and it feeds us spiritually as well as food. But I almost consider the food less important. The nutrition less important.